Oh, did it? Welcome everybody to the weekly body image. We need an official name for this. People, body image and relationship with yourself, food webinar hosted by White Pine Recovery. I'm John Taylor. I'm the owner of White Pine Recovery. Our expert is Alicia Taylor. She is an associate clinical mental health counselor who does great work with couples and is very passionate about and does great work with disordered eating and body image as well. So Alicia's going to give us a presentation for 20, 30 minutes, and then we'll open it to Q&A. So feel free to use the Q&A feature. Even before Alicia finishes teaching, you can submit questions so we can have some discussion as a group afterward. What do you have for us today, Alicia?
So today I thought it would be relevant to talk about how um, diet culture um, is shows up in specific groups of people or cultures, for lack of a better word at the moment. And I happen to be in Utah, and this is where my clients are from, and this is the context in which I'm treating them. And so we're going to look a little bit closer, more specifically at Utah and how diet culture shows up here.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So I just want to give a disclaimer that as mental health providers, culture is always relevant to the narrative and experience of our clients. And so our purpose is not to condemn a specific culture or to demonize a specific culture, but to understand and even when necessary, critique a culture in nuanced ways, recognizing both the benefits and harms that it offers. Because within every culture, there's both. It's a both and situation. So in Utah, I'm sure people have heard the term toxic perfectionism. In Utah, that can show up uniquely because there is such a strong religious base, specifically the LDS religion. And I want to clarify that wherever you have people who are deeply religious, there's wonderful things that come from that. And then there are also some um, like harmful cultural narratives that can bubble up. And so I am speaking at times specifically about the LDS culture, but this I'm sure shows up in other religions. But this is the context in which I often am working with people in. Um, so uh so in Utah specifically, there's not the highest, but there's a high rate of eating disorders. Um, let's see. Um, And some of that shows up in not just the disordered eating in and of itself, but also the need to try to perfect like your outside image. And so um, research shows that LDS or Mormons in Utah get major cosmetic surgeries and enhancements at a rate roughly 10% higher than the national average. So you take the entire national average and you have that number. And then Utah alone is 10% higher than that national average, if that makes sense. Um, Salt Lake City has the highest number of plastic surgeons per capita, or a higher number of plastic surgeons per capita than LA. Um, there was a quote from a plastic surgeon that I thought was interesting, and this is kind of like in defense of plastic surgery, which we're not defending or degrading plastic surgery in and of itself, but it's interesting to look at or question why there's such a higher rate of plastic surgery in our population. So this plastic surgeon said Utah is home to a sophisticated, well-educated population concerned about health and appearance. He explained, so it's not surprising that Salt Lake has become a destination for patients who want safe, cutting-edge aesthetic surgery. He also said that in Utah, women have children at a younger age than any other state in the nation. Consequently, there are women in their late 20s who've already had multiple children and want to address the effects of pregnancy, childbirth, and breastfeeding. So his take is there's people who are sophisticated and well educated. So obviously, they're going to want the best of plastic surgery. Um, let's see. So, um, looking closer at some of the issues that are going on in within Utah. Um, Utah is frequently listed among the top 5 states in the US for the highest per capita search volume related to eating disorders on the internet. Um, in Utah public high schools, young women are significantly more likely to develop an eating disorder than young men. So I think that highlights that there's a lot of pressure for young women to look a certain way, and they're not just making that up in their own heads. Um, so um, to look at maybe why that's happening, why there's like higher rates of plastic surgery, um, higher rate of eating disorders, and even a concern about eating disorders. Um, some of the thoughts are that we have such a homogeneous group of people that comparison and kind of a copy and paste, like I just want to look like everyone else so that I fit in. Um, if everyone has the like perhaps the capacity to look like everyone else, then that's kind of what people seem to do. Where if you have a lot of diversity, it's just like, oh, like everybody is different, and so it's fine that mine doesn't look like everyone else's. But to highlight how homogeneous it is, more than 72% of the population in Utah is white, which seems crazy high to me. Um, Hispanic or Latino is 17.6%. Two or more races is 4.6%. Asian is 3.1%. American Indian and Alaskan Native is 2.1%, or Black or African American is 1.7%. So if you don't have, and then sorry, Pacific Islander is 1.3%. So if you don't have this mix of different body types and hair colors and skin colors and eye colors, you start to feel very different if you don't match what is highlighted as the ideal. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, um, so I happen to really admire this therapist that I'm going to quote. I got some of this off of her blog. Her name is Ashley Hunt, and she's a disordered eating therapist. And to preface this, high religious standards can lead to an obsession with not only observing spiritual cleanliness, but also physical purity and perfection. So, like I always tell my clients, it's impossible for you to tell me where your brain ends and your body starts because it's so interconnected and it would be hard to describe or figure out where that is. With spirituality, if it's an embodied spirituality, you would connect what's happening to your physical body to how you're observing things spiritually, especially if there's a big emphasis on that in your culture. So Ashley Hunt said that she said many women have grown up in environments where appearance is noticed, commented on, and tied to worth, even if it is not stated that way. At the same time, many women have also learned to be responsible, self-aware, and know what is expected of them. That combination can lead to being more worried about their bodies. When your experience does not match what you think it should be, it makes sense that you would try to change yourself. So, speaking of having kind of high expectations for your morality and your purity connected to your body. Um, there's another billboard I have for Johnny to share with us.
Is that the one you wanted?
That's one of them. Yeah. So love thyself. So the command, the scriptural command, love thyself. Um, what the actual scripture is love thy neighbor as thyself, right? Um, and they're like, we'll love how you look. And it's from Laser, but Beauty Lab Laser. So some sort of cosmetic procedure so that you can love your selfie more. I think that's not accidental that they used a play on familiar scriptural wording. But the next one I think is the most impactful. God's remodeling his temple. Isn't it time to remodel yours? Howland Plastic Surgery. So I'm just curious, like, what that brings up for you.
Well, it just like I don't know. I think it's gross. I think both of them are kind of gross. Um, and in that, I mean, like there's deeply held personal beliefs that are being piggybacked with
Exploited.
yeah, they're tacking an insecurity onto your personal belief. And to me, as you've been talking, like I've been thinking like we've looked at media in general, just like last time we just did a bunch of like advertisements and pictures like that, and we just talked about how this impacts like I do think it's really important to look at also spiritual and religious channels and what messages about bodies get tacked into those or are part of those. Um, because again, there's not like a right way to think about this, but I think it's important to know how to think about this and to have permission to think critically. And this is just it's really flagrant to me. That's my initial reaction.
Yeah, it's very manipulative, I think. And obviously, it's not from the church, and I think that's clear to people. However, it's manipulating people's deeply held beliefs, and I think touching on some known known insecurities
Hmm.
that people have.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and exploiting it. So, based on your experience as a therapist for many years, how often do you see kind of people's own mental health issues come out in ways that kind of play on their religious beliefs in harmful ways?
Yeah, like the term that I got introduced to almost on day one of being a therapist was spiritual bypass. And, I am all for, comfort and purpose and direction that people can get from their spiritual or religious practices. But I think there's a difference between that being actually like grounding and perspective being and being the thing that we go to avoid the pain and discomfort that is inherent in the human condition or the struggle that's inherent in the human condition. So again, as therapists, it's never our job to prescribe spiritual beliefs, but I often see that as um, it's kind of a back room that I think a lot of people can feel comfortable hiding in. And, as soon as you put spirituality or religion on it, there's this expectation, I think, in a lot of people like, well, that's just what I believe, so it has to work, and it can only produce me feeling good. And it's often a place that people are surprised to see like there's actually some pain in this for me, or there's some hurt in this belief for me.
Yeah, and in fact, I think if you see that someone really does benefit in some ways and even get some really positive um, support and comfort from their beliefs, like I would help them explore how to get more authentically to that place and kind of break down the things that have in fact been harmful and stop them from accepting themselves loving themselves, and because I think there's a lot of joy to be had.
Hmm.
But a lot of times messages get twisted, and it prevents them from experiencing the positives that can come from people observing a religious or spiritual or both life, you know?
Hmm.
Um, so like I said before, that they found that like girls are more prone to eating disorders in high school in Utah. For many women, faith shapes how they think about their body, their worth, and how they should feel, which can be helpful, and it can also be really harmful and cause undue pressure, in how girls think about their bodies, how they inhabit their bodies, and whether they feel safe in their bodies. Um, so that takes me to a quote that I want you to read. Um, and just to say that I think that this quote just highlights how we are all susceptible to diet culture, to fat phobia, um, and even with the best intentions, people can bring a lot of harmful messaging. And that's why it's important that, like, we might have these people that we admire, and we still need to be vigilant about what we buy into.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
Is
you,
that a good preface?
yeah, yeah. I think that's a perfect preface. And you have to be conscious of how the message hits you and what it makes you think of. Because again, a lot of this, I don't know that it's intentional. I think it's an avenue, an amplification of whatever might be going on in that person.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's important to know, like, oh, they might be experiencing their own body shame
Yeah.
or whatever it is. And sometimes the best thing to do is pick up the remote and turn it off, or,
Yeah.
push the button to turn it off, and
Yeah.
just go do something else that doesn't make you feel bad.
So this comes from Susan Tanner in 2005. She was the leader of the organization in the LDS Church for young women at the time. And it says here, I remember an incident in my home growing up when my mother's sensitive spirit was affected by a physical indulgence. She had experimented with a new sweet roll recipe. They were big and rich and yummy and very filling. Even my teenage brothers couldn't eat more than one. That night at family prayer, my father called upon mom to pray. She buried her head and didn't respond. He gently prodded at her. Is something wrong? She finally said, I don't feel very spiritual tonight. I just ate three of those rich, sweet rolls. I suppose that many of us have similarly offended our spirits at times by physical indulgences, especially substances forbidden in the word of wisdom, which is kind of a health code directive in the LDS Church. Especially substances forbidden in the word of wisdom, which have harmful effect on our bodies, numbing influence on our spiritual sensitivities. None of us can ignore the connection between our spirits and our bodies.
I don't disagree with the last thing she said. There is a connection. What do you wish she would have said instead after that story about her mom? Or do you
Uh,
have any thoughts on that?
here's what I wish. My mom was so silly sometimes. There is nothing wrong with eating three rich, filling sweet rolls. And if your body felt bad, that might make sense from eating a lot of that kind of food. Like that would make sense, but you and God are okay after that. So don't worry about don't worry about it. And I also want to point out unless she was making those sweet rolls with things like drugs,
Crack
alcohol,
cocaine.
tea, coffee, which are prohibited. Well, tea and coffee are not expressly prohibited in the word of wisdom. It's inferred that they're prohibited. I don't know what substance she's referring to here that was forbidden by the word of wisdom. So I see this in religious and spiritual communities a lot. You can have kind of a personal or a spirit or a social um, soapbox or prerogative that gets folded into somebody's deeply held spiritual belief, where it's inferred or it's said, "Oh, that's part of it too,"
Yeah.
um, when it's not.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I wish that she would have said, like, my mom was wonderful and she had unnecessary guilt about things and she over focused on unimportant areas of her spirituality.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but that is a perfect example that, like, this was obviously and is obviously a pressure that some people feel in connection to their spirituality that I have to observe perfect health in my body. And as I hope that I've illustrated over the last several webinars, who knows what that means? Who knows what that means food wise? Who knows what that means exercise wise? Like it is should be a very personal process for all of us to figure out what feels good to our bodies and what makes us feel healthy. And it can't be this like broadly prescribed message. Um, so it was just very disappointing that that was her ending. And then it just perpetuates the guilt and the shame that people already feel if they feel like they are not in the right kind of body um, or observing the right kind of habits. And I'm not like trying to make this a spiritual webinar, but like, yeah, I think hopefully the message is like that's not the important thing that creates a connection with a higher power is how many like I would hope that that higher power doesn't give a crap how many sweet rolls you know, like I don't
That's
know.
to put it in 12-step terms, that's the God of my understanding, that how many sweet rolls you ate is not super important in the scheme of things.
Right, exactly. Um, and then I came across this research paper that has to have been based on this talk because the title of the research paper is Salvation and Sweet Rolls, an
Oh my
examination of
gosh.
Mormon diet books. And I think there were some interesting points that I'd like to highlight, if that's okay, from this paper.
It's your webinar. Don't ask for permission. Just
Okay.
do it, lady.
Just want to make sure you're still interested. So the author of this coined well, I don't know if she coined the phrase. She didn't. She explained the phrase or the term healthism, which is a system of expectations for an individual to mediate risk through the correct choices. If I make all of the correct choices, I can avoid A, B, and C, which can come up in like spiritual things. I can avoid condemnation or whatever it is. It presents health as a moral imperative. So when I talked about we don't say good or bad with food because food is not moral. Food is neutral. And when we prescribe morality to it, then it makes us feel things about ourselves when we consume those foods. So either we eat perfectly and we feel like we're morally superior, or we eat in a way that we don't think is perfect and we feel shame. We feel like we're bad, which neither is a good thing, neither is preferable. So it creates a moral imperative, and the only acceptable way to live in a bigger body is to be the stereotypical good fat person who eats particular foods and exercises regularly. So we have to see that you're working on it, and then we can accept you where you're at. Thus, current fat phobia is based on the false assumptions that body size equals health. Health is an individual ability, and health is a moral imperative that gives a person value. Hopefully, stuff I've talked about has made it very clear that size does not equal health, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But healthism kind of perpetuates this belief. The moral condemnation of the fat body grew substantially after the Second World War, which it didn't explain this, and I'm curious because you're such a World War II buff. Do you have any thoughts on that, or is that just like way out of the realm of what makes sense?
I mean, I have some guesses. I couldn't say for sure. I know that post World War II in America, that's where we have kind of the age of conformity, which was the mid 40s through the 50s. And then in the 60s through the mid 70s, we had the counterculture pushback for the conformity. So I could see that being part of that. Um, there was a lot of, I would imagine, with the horrors that everyone saw and went through during World War II, this sense of like, let's just get a lot of control and prosperity going was probably I mean, we didn't even call it PTSD back then. We called it shell shock, and we thought only feeble-minded
People.
people who were on the front
Oh,
lines could get it.
okay.
And so this idea that like the whole country would have gone through a trauma, for heaven's sorry to rant on this, but for heaven's sakes, we dropped atomic bombs and killed thousands and thousands of people, and that has to be horrendous to have witnessed that, even if you thought it was bringing the end of the war. So I could see my armchair therapist take on this is control always comes from a place of fear. And World War II was to put it lightly, a very scary time for everybody. So I could see that kind of being a backlash to the out of control. Um, I mean, and you have the Great Depression right before that too, which was very out of control.
Yeah, that I appreciate that
And
insight because
and
it
sorry,
go
a
ahead.
world war before that as well.
Right. Yeah,
So
just like constant
yeah,
trauma. Yeah.
yeah.
That is actually a really good insight and I think makes sense. The thing that I thought about is like they were rationed on so many things and I could see like if you had a bigger body, it might imply that you were not doing your part.
You weren't being fair. Yeah.
Yeah, you were taking more than what was due to you, and that was unappealing. Yeah, I think there's
Mhm.
layers to maybe why that increased after World War II. Um, it So the moral condemnation of a fat body has become a bedrock of American cultural norms. Moralizing body size associates fatness with immoral characteristics of laziness, lack of discipline, and incompetence. Diet culture appropriates aspects of religion to give legitimacy and power to the pursuit of thinness, moralizing body size in the process. Which I've seen that, I've felt that, I've experienced that. Um, and I just want to share the names of these LDS specific diet books because it shows it's like a mirror of the billboard that we saw where like what's that?
I didn't understand this genre existed.
I didn't
LDS
either.
specific.
I
Okay,
didn't
well,
either. This is news to
we're
me.
all learning
Thankfully,
something
I'm so
today.
glad I didn't ever have access to these books, but um so there's 5 diet books that this research paper highlights. They're written primarily for an LDS audience and center the word of wisdom, which you talked about before, in a way that they kind of manipulate it to fit their narrative. The audience here is critical because it impacts the narratives and methods of persuasion utilized by the authors. So even though there was outrage about that billboard and he took it down pretty soon after, he was still persuading his audience using their language, right? Um, and they convince readers that if they live the word of wisdom correctly in the way that they prescribe in these books, they will unlock the secret to weight loss, which is framed as crucial and synonymous to health. So, let's see. So, one of the titles is Losing It with an exclamation mark. On the cover, the subtitle advertises the book specifically as an LDS guide to healthy living. So, I guess people who are not LDS wouldn't benefit from it, but people who are LDS are gonna become very healthy when they follow this diet. The diet solution uses a pronoun we to assert that as an LDS member, the author and reader are in the same community. So,
Mm.
like, hey, I'm here too. I understand you and I know how to help you. Um, and the author, he also says, we have been counseled to focus on commandments we are having trouble obeying. Um, so like everything that's hard for you, we're gonna buckle down and we're gonna get really, really good at this. And um, let's see. I am, I thought it said all of the. the titles for the books, but now I don't see them in here. There was, dang it, because there was one that was like very obviously like this is speaking to is like the word of wisdom and losing weight or something, just very specific to Mormon perspective. And the author of this said, because the LDS culture was founded and centrally operated in the United States, Mormon diet books present a U.S. perspective on fat phobia and Mormon culture, even though that does not necessarily reflect the international LDS community as a whole. And that's why I wanted to state like this is very Utah focused and based. And I don't know exactly why that is, except to say that there are some cultures that are formed that create their own meaning for observing spirituality and how that translates into how we live our lives and what our bodies look like. And I, as a therapist, hear things that are painful to hear that people are getting from places that should be loving and safe and uplifting for the individual. And I know that that is a thing too, that people do experience that, but I don't think it's helpful to pretend like those narratives and those messages don't exist. Because we can't do anything about them if we don't acknowledge that it's a reality within our culture. And I think it's important to call these sorts of things out. So that's what I have.
Great. Great. That was a good topic. Um, I wanted to ask you about this. There was a man that I worked with a while ago. Um, he's Orthodox Jewish, lived in New York, and had struggled with weight and health and diet for, a lot of his life. And one particular time we were talking, he said there was a deli really close to his house that he actually liked to eat at, but he said they weren't kosher. And he said, I was always worried about someone from the community or my rabbi seeing me in
Mhm.
this non-kosher deli, because he was also having some conflicts with his religious identity and things like that. What would you say to a person who is either wanting to adhere, because there's a lot of religions that come with dietary prescription, like you think about kosher, halal, Hindi, um, some Christian sects will have different, here's how
Mhm.
you should eat, what you should put in your body, what you shouldn't. Like,
Mhm.
what would you say to a person who is distressed to that degree, and part of it coming from that this is my religious spiritual prescription for how I'm supposed to be eating, and I'm not, or I don't want to.
I think that I would say let's step away from these prescribed diet expectations that you're feeling a lot of stress about, and we'll put that to the side for a little bit. And I want you to talk to me about what you love about your relationship with God or your higher power, and what you love about your religion and the ways that it feeds you. Talk to me about that. And if they can't come up with anything, then um then that would probably be another conversation to have. Like, let's explore why you're still pursuing this. And then after they identify, like, well, here's all the ways that I feel connected to God, here's the ways that I feel connected to my community and what it offers me. And then I would ask, do these feelings of guilt or distress align with the things that you love about your God or your community? Um, and if not, let's look at how you feel like you could access that more. And what is really important to me is you defining what is meaningful to you and staying connected to that religion and to God. Because I don't think any of that can mean much if you don't feel a lot of autonomy and freedom and observing your beliefs and your faith in a way that feels good to you, not punishing.
Yeah.
Um, does that answer the question at all?
Yeah, yeah, and I think ultimately that's where he ended up directing is like it's not the diet that I'm concerned with, it's how the community broadly makes me feel. And he said there's I didn't know this, but in the Orthodox community, he said my family members who are not practicing Orthodox anymore, the Orthodox members of the family are, if you're not dead to them, it's like we're gravely concerned with how wrong you are. I didn't realize that about it. He said there's plenty of Jewish people walking around who don't eat kosher,
Yeah,
and
sure.
I would feel loved
Sure.
and accepted by them. And
Sure.
um, so as I think as is often the case with stuff like this, the food aspect is very, very important to focus on. There's often stuff that comes along with it too. I didn't know the term healthism. Um, I loved learning about that today. And I could place that across my career with, people and times in my life too, where I've gotten wrapped up in like, if I just make all the right choices, things are going to work out the way that they should or the way that I envision them for my body.
Yeah, the thing that I don't like seeing in myself, but in my clients, is this idea that like I am going to be in trouble. Like I'm a child, almost like they feel like they're still a child. And I really want people to inhabit their adulthood, to really
Mm,
like own the fact that they're an adult. And because of that, they get to decide, right? And you might decide that well, I feel good about observing all of the things that they want me to or the expectations, but I'm feel good about it because I'm very clear that this is what I want and not because I'm afraid of being punished or being in trouble by someone, because in my mind, like that's not a healthy place to observe these things based on.
I like that a lot. Feel free to submit your questions about this topic, LDS, Mormon culture, diet culture, or anything else. Body image, healthy relationship with food related. Um, on piggybacking on what you just said, could you say more about that kind of like, how did you say it? Being adult about or being a grown up about
Inhabiting their adulthood.
inhabiting your adulthood? Could you say more what it would look like maybe for some of these health codes that can come along with some religious or spiritual practices? What does inhabiting your adulthood look like within the context of those health codes? How do you maybe move from something that feels like you're cut off from God because you ate too many sweet rolls versus I'm doing this and I'm adhering to this and it's good for me, it's healthy for me.
Oh, well, so I was thinking about like, say I was an audience member in that talk and I was not inhabiting my adulthood and I was going along like I think I'm doing pretty good, and then I hear this message and I am suddenly filled with shame and I start to go, there's so much I have to change. And again, going back to that like panic, like things have to change immediately or I'm not okay. I thought I was doing fine, but apparently now like I have to take sugar out of my diet or something because God is can't the spirit can't be with me if I eat a lot of sugar. That's kind of like um a lost kid that's afraid if I don't like follow all the things I'm not gonna be right with God, or I'm gonna be punished, bad things are gonna happen, et cetera, et cetera. But if I was like fully inhabiting my adulthood, I'd be like, I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
That's interesting that that's what they have to say, but I feel fine about eating sugar. It's never made me feel like I'm not allowed to pray or like I can't feel, connected to God. That's when I think someone is very solidly like understanding where they stand with God, and it's a very
Yeah.
or where they stand with their beliefs, and it's a very solid relationship. Um, and as far as like um observing it, as you understand it and it feeling good, you could say, well, I have experiences where I'm glad that I've avoided these things that my religion has taught me to avoid. Um, and that's why I do it, is because it makes sense to me. It makes even common sense to me that this would benefit me.
I think anytime you do a topic where this is adjacent to spirituality or sexuality and lots of other things, like it's going to bring up a lot. And I can feel that. And just as you're talking about this inhabiting your adulthood, I think there's factors of any religious community that are actually more about the norms in the community, the culture, however you want to say that, than they are about the core tenets of that religious practice. So when you talked about like this cultural thing it's not appealing to Mormonism across the world. It's very specific to Mormons in a Utah Mormon culture.
Yeah.
And I think that that could be another important way of kind of picking through like where is the pressure coming from? Is this a pressure that I feel between me and my higher power? Is this a pressure I feel because I don't look like everybody else that I go to church with? We did have
Yeah.
something coming on the Q&A.
Okay.
This is one of our very faithful attendees. Not a question, but to go along with this, there seems to be an endless choice of life/diet coaches that are essentially online influencers who advertise themselves as specific coaches for LDS women. Why? Why does the information you're providing apply specifically to LDS women? I don't think they're providing healthy coaching in general, but it's making something more damaging by being exclusive.
Mm. Well, so the first thing that comes to mind is they do this because it is profitable. When you're trying to sell something, you have the more specific you are, the more likely you're going to be able to sell, um, like not more widely, but you're more likely to be able to sell your product. It will speak to people in a unique way. So the exclusivity piece is like, yeah, that I could see that being like, well, why can't you help me if I'm not LDS? Like, what's so special or different about what you're doing, or what's so wrong with me that it couldn't speak to me or work for me? But I think what really like the core of that is like they're just trying to use the language to sell the product. And they
I
need certain language speaks to certain people.
yeah. I see this in therapy in general, and I think there's some place. I certainly don't think with like diet or health. I don't think there's really a place where insights specifically about your religious background make a difference. So
Well, I would be suspicious that it's not manipulative
yeah,
spiritually on some level. Like I would be
yeah.
very like, I don't know about this if you come across something like that.
In counseling in general, I've seen people concerned with like, I'm Jewish, so I want a Jewish therapist, or I believe in the Bible, so I want someone who's biblically grounded. Um, like you said, there's benefits and there's harms to any group that we belong to. And I think having someone in a chair that maybe understands some of the culture that you come from. Now, I'm sure that these influencers are not like, hey, I understand the problems that are inherent in being part of Utah LDS culture, and I can help you with that. I think they're saying if you're an LDS woman, you're supposed to eat, look, diet, exercise a certain way. But I think part of the downside to some of those affinity groups, and I see this in the therapy community all the time, is I part of the problem I'm having is I don't want to be challenged by things that I don't already believe or see, or like at the very least, I don't want to look critically at my own beliefs so that I can either inhabit my adulthood fully and say, no, I'm choosing this. It does actually make sense to me versus that more childlike place of, well, I do this because I'm scared not to.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I think it is comforting and helpful when someone gets where you're coming from, but I also think it's good to be challenged with different perspectives, but also hopefully if a therapist does challenge those perspectives, they're very respectful and can see the nuance. If
Hmm.
you have someone that's just like, hey, you got to get out of there, then that's problematic too. But
Yeah.
it is useful in therapy in general to be challenged because like obviously how we're seeing things and how we're doing things is probably not working great at the moment. And
Hmm.
that's why we're there,
Hmm.
you know?
And I can really identify with that fear of like if you don't understand me, you're gonna push something that it's not whether it's good for me or not. It's you're I'm not gonna feel understood. I'm not gonna feel valued. Um, but yeah, I think in the health and wellness industry that I don't see how that's not predatory only.
Yeah, that's the word I would use. I think it's just a selling point and they know that.
Yeah,
Um, and again, this is about profit. Like those diet books were about profit and they were using the lingo that they knew would speak to their chosen audience.
yeah,
But back to when you asked about like people choosing to observe these things for the right reasons, it made me think of the movie Chocolat. Um, and there was a priest or dear, I know you've seen the movie. I don't, he was some sort of religious leader in this small community, and Lent time was coming, and he was very against this chocolate shop that had just opened because it would tempt his people, he thought it was very important to observe uh, or avoid indulgence. And long story short, at a certain point in Lent, when he was like eating very little throughout this time, and of course, avoiding anything that was deemed indulgent, he was found in the chocolate shop window, asleep and covered in chocolate, because he was trying so hard to avoid anything enjoyable, pleasurable, indulgent that he ended up just losing his mind and just like cramming all the chocolate on display in his
not
mouth and passing out. And I think that's a good example of like, was he observing Lent for the right reasons, or was it about an image that he wanted to present to his people?
yeah.
And is it about like pleasure is bad? Is that what Lent is about? Or what are those sorts of things really about at their core? And how are you looking at it? And what's it creating internally for you? Is it creating this like just I'm about to just go completely crazy because my our brains are not created to be able to um restrict, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what I was gonna say to that. Like, no wonder why there's a binge, there's a restriction.
Yeah.
In the work that I've done as a sex addiction therapist, we talk about addictive neural pathways and how in recovery we utilize some of those same things, but it's different. So um there's the numbing pathway where we learn how to soothe in recovery instead of numb. There's the fantasy pathway where we learn how to focus even on things that have not happened in the future, but instead of just this diffuse fantasy, we focus. And one of the addictive neural pathways is deprivation, which is that like it's largely out of fear. The thing behind deprivation is something bad will happen, and this is how I can control. The recovery pathway is the ascetic, going without for a higher purpose. And I have found in the work that I've done with my clients that that higher purpose it can't be dictated to you. Like you have to put in the work and you have to find the connection or you have to have the hope. So there's a lot of religious practices like fasting, or you talk about Lent, or I'm trying to remember in the Muslim world, Ramadan, where you don't eat during the day, you eat at night. Like there's all sorts of things that can be like really, I think, edifying spiritual practices. But I rarely see that the individual who is going along feels edified by that. I think they feel tortured by it. I think the
Hmm.
individual who says, okay, what is this really about for me? What do I want to get out of this? What am
Hmm.
I going to put into this? You
Hmm.
can see those times of the ascetic. I'm going to go without for a higher purpose. You can see it be elevating, but it's not the restriction that elevates. I think it's the purpose behind that and the personal meaning that elevates more than the
Yeah.
diet
And
part.
I think I agree with that. And I think sometimes the conclusion might be like, it doesn't make sense for me to observe that.
Mhm.
It's too connected to the punishing that I've put myself through historically. It's too connected to restriction of like food in a way that was trying to like um, control my body. Um, and so if ultimately it's harmful, like I also want to help people to know like it's okay to let go of something um, in order to create more meaning and more connection in other ways. So if you can't find that in that thing that you thought you were supposed to do, find something else. So,
Wonderful, wonderful goodbye message. I think we'll end there. All I will say is we've started to upload these previous ones to our YouTube channel, White Pine Recovery. So you can find this one as well as some of our previous ones there. We'd really appreciate if you followed, shared, liked, if you appreciate
yeah.
this. And we'll see you all next week.
Yeah, thanks everyone.